Princess Lilibet Diana had been christened. Why would they use a title for their children that represents an institution they loathe so much? Well, Harry and Meghan have never provided any evidence for that highly incendiary claim.
Many people who follow the royal family know Meghan Markle as a confident and outspoken person, but not everyone sees the pressure she faces behind closed doors. Away from the carefully planned interviews and public events, a new controversy is now starting to grow. Some reports suggest that Piers Morgan has shared information about Archie and Lilibet. So, what exactly was revealed in this investigation? And what impact could it have on Meghan Markle's already complicated relationship with the public and the media? But do you think these claims are being taken too far? Or is there real cause for concern about privacy and media reporting? Let us know what you think in the comments. And to stay updated with more royal stories like this, make sure you subscribe. Piers Morgan's shocking claims about Meghan. The story surrounding Meghan Markle begins in a way that already feels familiar to many royal watchers. Her childbirth is linked to the Portland Hospital, a well-known private hospital in London that has long been associated with caring for women and children, including several members of the royal family, such as relatives of Prince Harry. But in this particular case, public attention did not feel ordinary. Instead, it came with stronger curiosity, sharper questions, and growing suspicion from some commentators. One of the loudest voices in the discussion was Piers Morgan, who strongly criticized the reports and claims circulating online about Meghan's pregnancy story. When suggestions appeared claiming that her pregnancy timeline might not be fully consistent, or that parts of it may have been carefully managed for public presentation, he reacted very strongly. On his television program, he leaned forward, struck the desk, and dramatically asked, "So, which part was real? Any of it?" From his point of view, he believed the public image of the Sussexes was becoming increasingly damaged. He argued that their reputation, which he already considered under pressure, was facing another serious blow. He also claimed that the timing of these discussions made everything worse, since public debate around the couple had already been tense for months. At one point, he described the situation as the biggest contradiction of all. According to his claims, the issues were not just small errors or misunderstandings. Instead, he suggested there were major inconsistencies. He referred to what he called conflicting internal notes, mixed timelines, and statements that did not always match public appearances. He also pointed to photographs that, in his opinion, raised more questions than answers. In his interpretation, even moments of motherhood appeared to be carefully managed, almost like staged public events with controlled lighting, precise angles, and a planned message. He also focused on how Meghan was photographed during different moments of her pregnancy. He claimed that images and videos seemed inconsistent. Sometimes, the baby bump appeared higher, sometimes lower. At times, she held it closely, while at other times she did not. While many people explain such differences as normal effects of clothing, posture, or camera angles, he argued that these variations were not random and instead suggested a deliberate pattern. He further claimed that the public timeline of the pregnancy did not match what he believed was happening behind the scenes. In his view, the secrecy surrounding the pregnancy was not only about privacy, but also about controlling public perception. He suggested that confusing details and unanswered questions were being used to shape a more emotional and sympathetic public narrative. Piers went even further, saying that an unnamed insider had allegedly provided a real timeline, including notes, schedules, and hospital-related records that, according to him, did not align with public statements. He claimed that certain dates did not match, that appearances did not always fit, expected stages of pregnancy, and that some reported hospital visits did not align with public sightings. However, these remain claims he presented, not verified facts. Growing more frustrated during his commentary, he expressed anger on air, saying he was tired of being told to accept every version of Meghan's story without questioning it. He also said he was frustrated at being labeled a conspiracy theorist simply for pointing out what he believed were inconsistencies. In his argument, he portrayed Meghan not as someone controlled by the royal system, but as someone actively shaping her own public narrative. He suggested that pregnancy-related moments were being used to gain sympathy, respond to critics, and influence public opinion. He also claimed that staff were managing unusual requests and working carefully behind the scenes to maintain a controlled image, which he interpreted as an effort to manage perception rather than simply protect privacy. He listed several examples to support his view, including claims of severe morning sickness alongside public appearances that looked energetic, statements about isolation despite reported staff support, and emotional public moments followed by normal daily activity soon after. To him, these patterns felt rehearsed rather than spontaneous. He even suggested that multiple versions of the birth story may have existed in preparation, depending on how media coverage developed. He compared the situation to a film production, where different scenes are prepared in advance and selected based on audience reaction. He also referenced the well-known interview with Oprah Winfrey, saying that the timing, emotional tone, and delivery appeared carefully structured to create a powerful public response. As these claims spread, public reaction became deeply divided. Some people strongly defended Meghan, saying the accusations were unfair, biased, or exaggerated. Others argued that public figures should face closer scrutiny and greater accountability. Throughout this, Piers continued to speak confidently, insisting that the inconsistencies he saw needed to be addressed. Meanwhile, Meghan did not publicly respond to these specific claims. There were no new statements or interviews addressing the accusations directly. For Piers, this silence strengthened his interpretation, and he used it to keep the discussion alive. Online, conversations became increasingly heated. Some supporters began to ask new questions, while others who had previously defended her became more cautious or quiet. The debate continued to grow, shaped by strong opinions on both sides and ongoing media attention. One of his strongest claims was that several versions of the birth story had already been prepared in advance, each one carefully written to shape how the public would understand and react to it. He suggested that this was done to control the narrative and influence public opinion. But how did this controversy affect the royal family? And could it create tension or even division within the monarchy? Let's take a closer look. Meghan Markle's pregnancy scrutiny. Catherine, Princess of Wales, was seen leaving the famous Lindo wing just a few hours after giving birth. She looked extremely neat, calm, and perfectly put together. She wore high heels, her hair was carefully styled, and her makeup looked perfect, almost as if she were attending a formal event rather than having just delivered a baby. She gently held her newborn in her arms and paused for photos, giving the public their very first look at the child. This was not a one-time moment. She did the same thing 3 different times after each of her children was born. Every time she appeared calm, steady, and glowing, as though she fully understood how important the moment was. These appearances quickly became very famous and helped shape how people see modern royal motherhood today: graceful, open, and shared with the public. However, for many people, this was not just about looks or fashion. It was not about trying to impress anyone. Instead, it showed something deeper: a strong sense of duty, respect for royal tradition, and a willingness to share a very personal and joyful moment with the public. For many watching, it felt honest and heartfelt, almost like saying, "This happiness is something we are sharing together." On the other hand, Meghan Markle's pregnancy was seen by some observers as quite different and at times confusing. Instead of a simple and clearly presented journey, it sometimes felt like a story where small details seemed to change, leading to new questions each time she appeared in public. At certain moments, her baby bump looked very clear, round, large, and easy to notice. She often supported it with both hands and moved slowly and carefully, as if she was being very protective. When sitting down, she lowered herself gently. When walking, she took careful steps, as though she had to think about every movement. Her body language gave the impression that she was carrying something very delicate. But then, unexpectedly, things sometimes appeared different. Within a few days, or sometimes even within the same week, new photos would show the bump looking smaller, flatter, or slightly different in shape or position. These changes were noticeable enough that they caught people's attention. Of course, some people explained this by pointing to camera angles, lighting, clothing, or posture, which can all affect how someone looks in photos. However, royal watchers, who have followed royal families closely for many years, are used to observing these kinds of details. They also understand how pregnancies usually progress, especially when someone is constantly in the public eye. So when things appear inconsistent, they tend to notice. Her movement at different times also added to the confusion for some observers. In some moments, she seemed very careful, walking slowly, holding her stomach, and moving as if even small actions required effort. But in other appearances, she looked completely different. She went upstairs quickly, turned easily, bent down without hesitation, and walked confidently even in high heels, as though she was not being limited at all. What made this more striking for some people was how quickly these changes appeared. Pregnancy is different for everyone, but these were not slow changes over many weeks or months. Instead, some observers felt the differences appeared suddenly, sometimes within days, or even within a short time. In one appearance, she looked clearly pregnant and moved carefully. In another, she appeared far more active and unrestricted. Because of this, some people began looking more closely at the photos. Screenshots were collected, images were compared side by side, and timelines were created to track each appearance. When placed together, the differences stood out more clearly to those analyzing them. For these observers, it did not seem like a single unusual photo that could be easily explained away. Instead, they felt it formed a repeating pattern. In some carefully captured images, she appeared clearly pregnant. In others, she looked less restricted and more physically free. As often happens online, once people began focusing on these details, the discussion grew quickly. Conversations spread across social media and online forums. Comment sections filled with people trying to understand what they were seeing and asking similar questions in different ways. Over time, a quiet sense of uncertainty began to form among some observers, an unspoken feeling that the photos and appearances were raising questions they could not easily resolve. But when Piers Morgan later brought up claims about supposed documents, many people felt that any remaining doubt or hesitation quickly disappeared. How could a baby bump appear to change so noticeably in such a short time? How could someone seem to struggle with movement one day and then look completely relaxed and comfortable the next? Let's take a closer look. The hidden truth behind Archie's birth. According to later claims, which were never clearly denied, something strange may have been happening behind the scenes. Quietly, away from the public eye, it was said that internal schedule notes were being passed around among staff. These notes were reportedly tracking Meghan Markle's appointments, daily movements, and official engagements during her pregnancy. At first, this might not seem unusual. Public figures often have very busy and carefully planned calendars. But if these notes were real, even in part, they did more than raise small doubts. They completely changed the way some people viewed the official story. The reports suggested that some hospital appointments were scheduled on the very same days Meghan was seen attending public events in London. These were not brief or unclear appearances, but full-day events with photos and records. In other words, the schedule suggested she should have been in one place, while clear images showed her somewhere else. And that creates a simple problem. A person cannot be in two places at once. Pregnancy timelines are not easy to move around. Medical appointments cannot simply be shifted like meetings in a diary. You cannot delay or speed up being 9 months pregnant to fit a busy schedule. The body follows its own natural process, not public relations plans. For many people, this contradiction raised doubts. Then another detail emerged, one that surprised even those who were not closely following the story. According to trusted sources and shared reports, Meghan had previously suggested she was planning a home birth at Frogmore Cottage. This fit the image she was believed to be building, something private, calm, and personal. It also seemed like a quiet break from royal tradition, choosing her own path rather than following long-established royal practice. Many people accepted this without question. Then, on May 6, 2019, the announcement came without warning. It was revealed that she had actually given birth at Portland Hospital in London instead. Of course, giving birth in a hospital is completely normal and often the safest choice, so that was not the main concern. What stood out was the lack of explanation that followed. There was no statement about why the plan had changed, no mention of medical advice, no clarification of how the earlier expectations had shifted, just silence. When a very public story is built around ideas like privacy, natural living, and independence, people usually expect at least a short explanation when something important changes. But none was given. The palace said nothing. Meghan said nothing. The story simply changed, as if the earlier version had never existed. That silence made people start looking back more closely. Old interviews were rewatched, past comments were reread, and timelines were examined again. Slowly, more questions began to form. If one major part of the story could change without explanation, people wondered what else might not be as clear as it seemed. And it was at this point that Piers Morgan entered the discussion, and he did not hold back. This was the moment that sharply divided public opinion. According to him, several different versions of Archie's birth announcement had already been written even before the baby was born. But who plans parenthood like a corporate marketing campaign? Who prepares multiple versions of a child's birth announcement the way a company prepares a product launch? Let's take a closer look. The royal birth announcement saga. The Buckingham Palace timing problem showed just how carefully everything around the event was being managed behind the scenes. Prince Harry and Meghan did not tell Buckingham Palace when Meghan went into labor. Instead, they kept it completely private. Hours after the baby was born, they only informed the royal communications team at around 6 a.m. By that time, Buckingham Palace had no idea what was happening. With little warning and very few details, officials rushed to release a public statement just 40 minutes later. But almost straight away, that statement ran into trouble. Harry and Meghan's own account said the baby had been born several hours earlier, which did not match what the palace had announced. This made Buckingham Palace look confused and unprepared to the public, as if they had made a mistake or were not properly informed. But according to critics, the deeper issue was that they had been deliberately left out of the loop. Some people argue this was not an accident or simple miscommunication. Instead, they believe it was a planned decision by Harry and Meghan to control the timing and the message, while the palace ended up looking wrong. Piers Morgan quickly highlighted this story. He argued that it showed how tightly managed Meghan's public image was, with every detail carefully controlled, from timing to messaging. In this view, it was not just a private family moment, but something closely staged and managed for public presentation, which made the palace appear disorganized by comparison. This also connects to the way Meghan described her experience in her interview with Oprah. She spoke about feeling alone, unsupported, and unhappy within the royal institution, and many viewers sympathized with her story. However, later reports and internal documents reportedly told a different story. They suggested that palace staff were actually instructed to meet many of her requests quickly. Staff are said to have changed schedules, canceled plans, and worked extra hours to deal with last-minute demands and requests. Another key point was about meetings and briefings. According to these records, Meghan was invited to attend important discussions several times, but chose not to go to some of them. Later, those missed meetings were described in public as if she had been excluded or shut out. Critics argue that she had been given the opportunity to attend, but did not always take it, and that this was later presented in a different way. Piers Morgan and others claimed this was not a case of being ignored or mistreated, but rather of strong efforts being made to accommodate her needs, even beyond normal limits. From this point of view, palace staff were working hard to meet expectations, while she still described herself as unsupported. Supporters of this view say that when people noticed this pattern, it changed how they saw the whole story and made the original narrative seem less straightforward. Once that doubt entered public discussion, everything else began to fall apart. What else might she have been hiding, and how did she respond to it all? Let's take a closer look. Meghan's quiet response. Meghan's quiet response. Amid the many claims being made, the contradictions being pointed out, and the so-called evidence being shared, Meghan reportedly did not respond publicly. There was no official statement, no spokesperson speaking out, no public defense from friends, no comment from the palace, and no legal action. In short, there was complete silence. For someone who has often responded strongly to negative stories in the past, sometimes even taking legal action or pushing back through public relations, this silence stood out to some observers. Commentator Piers Morgan repeatedly argued in public that silence itself sends a message, especially when serious claims are being discussed. In his view, not responding can increase suspicion rather than reduce it. Online, discussions began to shift. Some people who had previously defended Meghan strongly started asking questions. Instead of saying the criticism was unfair, they began wondering why there was no response or clarification if the claims were not true. As time passed, these questions became more common. At the same time, critics and commentators filled the gap with their own interpretations. They shared timelines, rewatched interviews, and circulated documents and clips. With no official rebuttal, speculation grew, and many people formed opinions based more on the lack of response than on proven facts. Harry's silence was also widely discussed by commentators. Some noted that he had previously spoken out in defense of his wife in other situations, yet did not publicly address these specific allegations. This led to further debate about why no response was given, with different people interpreting the silence in different ways. As doubts increased, earlier interviews, such as the well-known Oprah interview, were also re-examined by critics. Some commentators claimed they noticed patterns in emotional delivery, timing, and presentation, suggesting to them that the interviews felt carefully managed rather than completely spontaneous. A further argument made by critics like Piers Morgan was that Meghan's experiences of pregnancy and motherhood became a central part of her public image, which made criticism more sensitive. They suggested that this could discourage questioning, since public opinion tends to protect expectant mothers strongly. Each time the scrutiny increased, the discussion was redirected back to stress during pregnancy and emotional difficulties. If the facts are really on her side, why would they need so much protection? Could there be a trust issue? Let's take a closer look. Doubt around Meghan and Harry. By the time all the different pieces of the discussion were placed together, the situation had grown far bigger than anyone expected. They suggested that this could discourage questioning, since public opinion tends to protect expectant mothers strongly. Each time the scrutiny increased, the discussion was redirected back to stress during pregnancy and emotional difficulties. If the facts are really on her side, why would they need so much protection? Could there be a trust issue? Let's take a closer look. Doubt around Meghan and Harry. By the time all the different pieces of the discussion were placed together, the situation had grown far bigger than anyone expected. There were photographs being examined closely for possible inconsistencies, claims about documents being shared or referenced, changes in how the story was told over time, and at the same time, a striking lack of clear public explanation from the people involved. All of this combined created something that went far beyond a simple argument about pregnancy pictures, hospital timing, or official announcements. At that stage, it was no longer just about one moment or one specific claim. It had turned into something deeper in the public conversation, a debate about trust itself. People were no longer only asking whether one detail was correct or incorrect. Instead, many began questioning whether the larger story being presented could be fully relied upon at all. For some observers, it stopped being about small facts and became about credibility as a whole. The main question slowly shifted from, "What happened here?" to, "Can we trust what we are being told at all?" When people start to feel that a story does not fully make sense, their reaction is not always loud or emotional. It is often quiet and gradual. Doubt does not usually appear in a sudden burst. Instead, it builds slowly in the background of the mind. At first, it might just be a small feeling of uncertainty. Then it becomes a habit of paying closer attention. People begin to rewatch interviews, reread statements, and replay public appearances in their minds, looking for anything that seems unclear or inconsistent. This kind of doubt is very powerful because it does not need to shout to have an effect. It simply stays there, always present. It changes how people see everything connected to the story. Even ordinary moments that would normally not matter start to feel important. A small change in wording, a different timeline, or a missing detail suddenly becomes something that people notice and discuss. Once trust is weakened, every detail begins to look more important than it might actually be. According to critics and some commentators, the main issue was not one single mistake or one confusing statement. Instead, they argued that the concern came from a buildup of many small things over time. Each one on its own might not have caused much attention, but when combined, they created a pattern that some people found difficult to understand or accept. These included things like shifting timelines, where events seemed to be described differently at different times. There were also suggestions of possible scheduling questions around public appearances and announcements. In addition, some people pointed to carefully managed photographs and media moments that appeared highly controlled. There were also cases where announcements seemed to have been prepared in advance, leading some to wonder how early certain details were planned. And on top of all this, there was also the issue of limited responses or silence when questions were raised publicly. Taken one by one, each of these points might have had a simple explanation. However, when they were viewed together by parts of the public, they formed a larger picture that was harder for some to accept without doubt. Instead of seeing a smooth and fully clear narrative, these observers saw gaps, changes, and unanswered questions. This created a situation where the official story and the public interpretation did not always match. And when that happens, people often begin to fill in the missing parts themselves, sometimes in ways that may not be accurate. The situation became even more noticeable when people compared it with how other members of the royal family typically handled similar life events. For example, Catherine, Princess of Wales, was often seen leaving the hospital only a short time after giving birth. On multiple occasions, she appeared in public within hours, calmly presenting her newborn to the world. She was usually described as composed and traditional in her approach, showing the baby briefly to the media in a very structured and familiar royal setting. For many members of the public, this created a strong sense of openness and predictability. The process felt clear. There was an announcement, a hospital, appearance, photographs, and then a return to private life. This pattern built a sense of trust because it followed an established tradition that people could easily recognize and understand. In contrast, Meghan and Prince Harry were often described by observers as taking a different approach. Their communication style was seen by some as more private and less predictable. Certain details were not shared immediately, some timelines were explained later, and public appearances did not always follow the traditional pattern that people expected from the royal family. At times, when questions or criticism appeared, their responses were viewed by some critics as defensive or emotional rather than directly detailed. So, what do you think about Piers Morgan's astonishing revelation? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe.